Welcome to the show. I'm Doug Johnson, and each month we highlight someone who has a very powerful message about a strategy for success. Today's guest is a very different kind of guy, and I mean that in a good way. Known as the Tony Robbins of the East and one of the most connected people in Northeast Ohio, Jeff Nischwitz is a relationship builder, a story debunker, and an authenticity advocate who travels the country transforming people and organizations one story at a time. Let me introduce you to Jeff Nischwitz, who will introduce you to your own authentic self. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hey, Doug, good to be here. I'm
Thanks.
looking forward to it.
Jeff, tell us what you mean when you say that you transform people one story at a time.
Well, that's kind of the outcome of my years on the planet so far, of constantly trying to figure out what's working and what's not working.
Okay.
And I came to a couple conclusions from my own journey and watching other people, whether it's in an organization or outside, have their journey. And it's this simple reality. We've got lots of tools and tactics and tips, but people aren't getting where they want to go. So I thought, well, why, if we have all the resources, why can't we get where we want to go? Mm-hmm. So I realized there must be something in the way. It's not the absence of tips, it's not the absence of strategies. We sort of know how to get there, but we keep getting blocked or stuck.
Okay.
So I thought, so what are the obstacles? And I came to the conclusion that the core obstacle is a story or a series of stories. And what I mean by that is stories to me are the stories we believe to be true. Stories about how life is supposed to be. What does it mean to be in business? What does it mean to have a career? So it's stories about life, about business, about yourself, about culture. And my premise is they're all stories. And if we can tap in and say, here's what's going on, here's this obstacle, and it's just a story.
Okay.
And if we can let go of that story, or sometimes I say put it down, we just remove that obstacle to the success we wanted to achieve. We still have our tips and strategies and tactics, but now we're moving that obstacle, which is typically the story. So I help people, team members, whether it's a group or an individual, get those stories, identify them in stories, and get them out of their way. That's what I mean by transforming people and organizations one story at a time.
And also debunking stories.
And debunking is the process.
Okay.
Debunking is the process of looking at things and determining, is it a story? By the way, not all stories are bad. In fact, the point here is I'm not here to tell you what's a good or a bad story, but for every person to take ownership of their stories. Number one, identify them as a story. Okay. Determine if that story is serving them in their business, in their life, in their career, in their relationships. But that process is about asking questions. So debunking is, and it's funny, you gave my title, which is Chief Story Debunker,
Right.
which always gets questions. What's a debunker? So, well, basically, debunking is a couple steps. Number one is you have to accept the fact that our life is filled with stories. Because once you do that, we can say, well, maybe this is a story. And the debunking act, or the process of debunking, is really just two things. One, asking a lot of why questions.
Okay.
Why did I do this, or why didn't I do this? Never stopping at the first one. We always want to stop at the first one because it seems obvious, or that's what the whole world would say. But we got to keep going and say, well, so what? Even if, why aren't you doing this? Why are you doing it this way? Because when you get deep enough, you'll come up with a why that really matters, and that why is the source of that story. The other key to this is you got to be willing to tell yourself the truth, and have people around you who will challenge your stories and help you tell yourself the truth. That's the role I play with a lot of the folks I work with, debunker.
Okay. Well, that's pretty neat, Jeff. And we have a video clip of you in action, actually. And so we're going to watch the video, and we're going to get Jeffed.
Awesome, awesome. And in fact, in those 4 words, if I only knew, is the power to create the life and the business you've always desired. In those 4 words. That's it. It's the most significant one, it's the most impactful lesson, unfortunately, is a lesson I learned in tragedy. This picture was taken about 9 months before Greg's death, 30 years ago. And he made us feel like we mattered. He was one of the few people in the whole school where we felt valued and like he actually cared about us. And I still remember it like yesterday, almost over 30 years ago, standing there and saying, wow, 19 years old and he figured out the secret of life. He had. Treat people like they matter. Make sure they feel valued. The lesson from a tragedy is really the lesson of life and to transform your business.
We live in a culture that most people's bar is set firmly at mediocre, at getting by, at okay, fine, or even survival. And so when we have those huge years of incremental achievement, that magical 5, 10, aggressive 15% improvement over mediocre, where did it take us? It didn't take us where we wanted to be. It took us where it was safe. If I only knew.
You see, I believe that every single one of us came out of the womb perfect and brilliant. And the problem is we spent the rest of our lives picking up a bunch of what I'm going to talk about tonight are stories. Stories that other people told us and we picked them up and said, that sounds true.
Jeff touched some raw nerves, and I think when he said that tonight, it was kind of a lightning strike for me that said, gee, you know, you have some stories too, maybe that you ought to be investigating.
The essence of building these relationships and connecting with your clients and customers to create the world-class experience is simply a matter of listening for their stories and personalizing their experience based upon those stories.
Think about the impact of this. If your team members woke up every day and went to work focused on possibilities instead of being realistic. In their heart, they were focused on unleashing instead of getting things done. If their core commitment every day was to transformation instead of hitting some goals. And how would your life change if every day you decided to live the life you were meant to live? Not the one someone else wrote for you, not the one told you that you were worthy of, the one that's in your heart.
How many times have we had to do something and we went to make that call and said, no, I'm not going to call them because if I call them, they're going to keep me on the phone for 10, 15, 20 minutes. I don't have time for that. Wow, what a horrible problem. My customer or client wants to talk to me. I can't do that. Let me send them an email because I need to be efficient with them. I need to be time efficient. We're doing this to ourselves. The investment in those extra few minutes changes everything. I can't do that. We can't do that. You ever had that conversation in your business? That's too big. That's too hard. We can't grow our business 100%. We've never done it. It's too big. We can't create world-class experience. It's too hard. We're too far behind. So how do we beat the system? How do we beat society? How do we beat culture? How do we connect to our clients and customers? They have a story to tell. Your job is to listen, capture it, and utilize that information to personalize it.
You should be concentrating on the needs of your customer and building that relationship, and that's what all life is about. It's building that relationship.
Jeff just has a powerful presence. He has just an aura about him that you know that he's been there, done that. He's every man in that he's had some severe failings. He's also have a lot of successes, and he's willing to be open and vulnerable and share all of those.
Every corporation could use Jeff.
Just worry about who you were meant to be and why you are here and the impact that you will create every day. If I only knew, now we all know.
Jeff, there are so many strategies for success in that clip. I think my favorite is treat people like they matter. Can you talk about that a little bit, please?
You'd think that's an easy one. You know, if you met most people and you said, should you treat people like they matter? Very few people would say no. Everyone would say, absolutely, and I do it every day.
Right.
But the reality is we're not. We are so caught up in our own agenda, and we don't understand that it's our agenda. So most of my strategies for the folks I work with, especially organizations, is around what does it really mean to be other-focused? For example, I'm a believer that most of the things that get off course in our life are communication. We all know that. You know, the teams don't work well through communication. Our relationships don't work well over communication. But part of the problem is it's very self-focused. And while we think we're treating people like they matter, we're not. So if I can engage in a dialogue with you, and my whole goal is not for you to see my point, but to hope that you can understand my perception, that you can understand where I'm coming from, whether you agree or not. Now I'm focused on you. That's other communication, other focus. So treating people like they matter really means they become the focal point. So I can have an agenda, but the challenge is, and I preach on this a lot around relationships, if I have an agenda, the challenge is, can I interact with you in a mutually beneficial way and make sure your interests are considered when I have an agenda? It's hard. So I can have my agenda, and a lot of this is about becoming just more self-aware. So I can separate my agenda from the communication, from the interaction. So I'm always thinking about what's important to you, even if I might not be able to give it to you. In other words, you may not get it your way, but I need to be able to understand what your way is.
And even if you don't agree with it.
I could totally disagree with it. And a key ingredient to this is one that we talk about a lot, and I've embraced it almost as a life value system or a life reality, which is perception is the only reality that exists when it comes to people. So whatever you believe to be true is true until your perception changes. So my interaction with you needs to be about perceptions, not supposed facts. Most disconnects or disruption in communication is around disagreements about supposed facts. They're not facts. I talked to someone last night who just had lost a job, and we're talking about that their boss, they always had issues with their boss because the boss kept saying to them, why are you getting angry? And I kept telling them, I'm not angry. I said, yes, you were. They said, well, how do you know you weren't there? I said, because if they think you're angry, you were angry. And when you accept that, that's other-focused. That's treating people like they matter. Because I'm going to say your perception is the most important perception here. And I'm going to communicate with you and listen to you and interact with you, assuming your perception's correct. Even if I disagree, I will share mine. But I'm going to allow, and I'm going to make sure I understand your perception. That's treating people like they matter. Being present in a conversation is treating someone like they matter. And we live in a culture where it's really hard to do that. We're a distracted culture. You know, our phones are off for a reason.
Right.
Most times they're not in a meeting, aren't they? People are on their phone, they're communicating, they're texting, they're emailing. The single step that we can take towards treating people like they matter is to be fully present in our communication. No distractions. When you get distracted, you come back and say, they're the most important person right now. I am here, I am listening, and I am seeking to understand until this moment passes, and then I shift my presence somewhere else.
You know, it's interesting you say that, Jeff. There are so many times when, for instance, my wife and I go out to dinner, and there may be other folks around the dining area where we are, and every person in another party around the table will be on their cell phones. And when you talk about being actually present in the moment and in the conversation, so often it seems to us that just it's not that important. And it sends that message that you are not that important. Whoever or whatever I'm looking at on my cell phone is a lot more important than you are. So powerful stuff.
Well, and that's the awareness we need to have. If I pull my phone out when I'm with you, I decided my phone is more important than you. And a lot of people say, well, no, that's not what I mean, but this is important. No, in the moment,
And
whatever you're present
perception.
with, perception and intentions. And if people say it's hard to be present, I said, not really. If you set your intention and you make a commitment to be present, that means when your phone buzzes, you don't reach for it. That means when you start thinking about that grocery list or the job you need to do when you leave this meeting, I tell myself, wait a minute, right now I'm here for Doug. This moment is about Doug and I having communication, and I'm going to put that out, because that's about intentionality. Will it be perfect? Of course not. But it's based on a commitment, and I tell people that. I will tell them, look, I'm here to be present. And if I get distracted, I will tell them, right now, I can't be present because there's an issue going on with my son. Give me 2 minutes to take care of that, because I want to be present for you. I tell people that. And the reason I do that is now they can hold me accountable. Now I've raised the bar. I've told them I'm going to be present. It's really hard not to be now, because I told them that's what's coming.
And oftentimes, what's their reaction to that?
It is usually very positive, pleasant surprise. One of the greatest compliments I get is I have had dozens of people tell me over the last 5 or 6 years, Jeff, I've never had a conversation where someone was so present. Recently, I was setting up to do a speech, and one of the technical people came up and was asking me a question as I was setting up, and I was trying to do both. And I said to him, I said, you know what? These are the words. I can't be present for you right now. Let me set this up, because my personal commitment is to be present in my communication. And when I'm done with this, you will get my undivided attention, which I did. And later he said, I've never had anyone my entire life say that to me. That was really amazing, because most people would try and do both. They say, yeah, it doesn't work. And I don't want to do both badly. And I'm committed to be present for you, even if it's something as simple as a technical issue about setting up a video camera. I'm going to be present. So that's a choice and intention, and I honor that commitment.
I really wish, Jeff, that you would start a revolution of this kind of thing, because that's what we all need. We need to be present. There are so many complaints nowadays about the government isn't doing this, or my spouse isn't doing that, or my children aren't doing whatever. And if we practiced that being present, what a change there would be.
Well, I think I was reading/listening to a book the other day by Simon Sinek, who I think is a fantastic speaker and author, and he wrote a book. Most recent book is called Leaders Eat Last, and he does video clips through the book, and his video the other day was just this point. His premise was we should not allow cell phones in an office. And in fact, he said cell phone users should be treated like smokers. You can smoke, but go outside to use your cell phone. Because he said the cell phones are disrupting our communication, they're getting in the way of our relationships, and we're trying to multitask when we really can't do it. And I'm applauding. I wanted to jump out of my chair and say, right on, Simon.
Sure.
Yes, let's do that. In fact, another friend of mine, this is how far off we are in our culture. I had a friend who had an idea for a restaurant. The idea for the restaurant, one of the core themes was that there would be no ability to get wireless or cellular coverage. He wanted to put things in the walls, so if you came in the restaurant, you couldn't use your cell phone. You were blocked, because it was designed to stimulate conversation and people being present. Sadly, we do need a revolution, because we are so far off course and we are not close.
What is the timeline for that restaurant?
Well, it's all about money, right? It's
Right.
about money. Who's willing to invest money in a place where you can only talk to each other? I would be one of the first customers, because that's what I like.
And I would be too.
Well, it's a small group, but it's growing.
Okay.
It is growing.
That's really very interesting and very telling, actually. Kind of sad on the one hand. One of the other tidbits in the video, Jeff, you mentioned live the life you were meant to live. Would you expand on that?
Yeah. Some people think that means something like destiny. It's not what I mean. What I mean is really living life on purpose.
Okay.
Figuring out, and I go through a process with people, I do it with friends, I do it with everyone. It involves circles, 'cause I'm a circle guy. And it involves us basically figuring out, what are your gifts? we all have skills, and the mistake we make is trying to figure out our skills. Well, you and I and everyone in this room and everyone at home, they're very talented people. We're human beings. We're brilliant. We can do a lot of things and we can do them well, but most of us have a handful or less of true gifts, things that we do that very few people do as well as us.
Okay.
And if we can take those gifts, line them up with things we love to do, and line them up with the impact we want to create, we start finding our almost perfect path, whether it's community involvement, whether it's our career, whether we have our job, but this is the thing I'm going to do over here personally to express myself. So for myself, I have a short list of gifts. You know, I see my gifts as I'm a really good storyteller, thus I'm a speaker.
Right.
I'm a really good questioner. I'm really good at asking questions that help people see things differently. That helps with the story debunking. And I'm really a good listener. I listen deeper than most and differently than most. That's my short list, and everything I do leverages those gifts. And the challenge I see is people are afraid to figure out this purposeful or on-purpose life, because then once you figure it out, it's a lot harder to stay where you're at. Because as long as you're in the dark, I can keep saying here's my most famous line I hear from people. I said, what do you want to do? I said, I don't know. I said, yeah, I think you do.
Deep down.
They said, what do you mean? I really don't know. I said, well, here's the problem. If you did know, then you'd have to do something about it. So it's a lot easier to not know, even though I think you know. And that's what I mean. Are you willing to take the risk? Because there's always a risk. To define your life and decide, I'm going to live my life on purpose, and I'm going to create a personal mission, which I'm a big fan of, and I'm going to design my life versus just show up in it and see what happens. That's what I mean by living the life you're meant to live, which is really the life you're choosing to live versus the default life you end up in, which is what most people do.
Right. And that's pretty sad.
It is. It makes me sad.
I understand, Jeff, that you're working on a book.
I am, yes.
Okay.
It's been an interesting process. It's an interesting process because when I started the book, I felt good about the topic, and through my speaking, I thought I had shared a lot of my story. And what I realized in writing the book is that I didn't share anything new about myself, but it was the book writing was part of my journey.
Okay.
That I took my story deeper. I connected to my own story deeper. I allowed myself to be even more vulnerable than I had been before. It brought up a lot of fear. I learned a lot more about stories, the types of stories I created that were really fear just dressed up. Because by the way, most stories are fear dressed up in a story.
And kind of avoidance.
Exactly, avoiding. It's my way of avoiding. And it gives me a good reason to avoid it, because I don't want to admit I'm afraid. So this book writing has been fascinating, and it's a unique concept because it's really about integrating this concept. It's about leadership in general, but not in the traditional sense.
Okay.
Because the premise of the book and most of my work today is that there's not a separate personal you and a business you. People are always trying to figure out, do I hone my business skills or work on my personal growth?
Right.
I'm saying it's the same thing. So this book is about, I create a term actually, which I love. My friends think I'm annoying because I create words. So I created this word called livingship.
Okay.
And the book is about livingship. The book is about making clear decisions about who you're going to be as a person. That's in your life, in your relationships, in your family, with your teams, in your career. If you own a business, it's in your business. Get clear about that and then live that life on purpose. And therefore you are leading your life, and that's what I mean by livingship. So it's saying business and personal have never been separate. In fact, we don't even have to integrate them. They're already one and the same. And your livingship, and thus your leadership, will be the outcome of who you choose to be as a person and how you choose to purposefully show up in that life that you have designed. Because when you do that well, Doug, I could take a person and give them years of leadership skills, but if they as a person are not in alignment, they're not going to be a good leader. Because I'm giving them the skills, but they can't implement them well because something inside of themselves is off course, usually driven by one of these stories that have them thinking a certain way, acting a certain way, making decisions a certain way, or living what I call the multiple lives which is why the book is going to be titled Unmasked. It's about taking off all the masks and tapping into your authentic self, your authentic leader, so that you can live and lead the life you were meant to. Whatever you choose, it is.
That's really pretty neat, and I'm sure that we will all be watching for the publication
soon.
of that book.
Just
soon.
a few months away.
Okay, we will watch for it. Jeff, we're winding down. Any last words of wisdom for our audience?
Yeah, Doug, you know, I get asked this a lot, and it's really, I've simplified life and I've simplified the lessons. I think that some things are hard, but nothing has to be complicated. And the simple thing I would share with you is it's about choices. I have made a conscious decision and adopted it as a core value of my own, which is that my life is the outcome of my choices. There's nothing that can happen to me where I don't have a choice. And I have situations happen where people say, well, that's out of your control. I'll say, but wait a minute. Over here are some choices I made that help contribute to this circumstance happening. Because when I take responsibility for my life, personal ownership, be self-accountable, and own my choices, then I have complete control in my life. Not like most people try and control it. I'm talking about literal control, because my choices are going to determine everything. And when I take those choices and turn them into action, my life will change. We talked earlier about perception.
Right.
My life's perception is my perception. So I can change that through the choices I make. I can't say it more clearly or with more passion that if we can own our choices, we have the power to change everything. And if we don't own those choices, we have the power to control nothing.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Doug.
And I hope our audience got as much out of the conversation as I did.
I hope so. It was a good time. It's always a pleasure to see you, Doug.
Same here, Jeff. Okay, so you want to make a common sense decision, right? Okay, here's an easy way to do it using stories. First off, think of the decision you have to make. And this is a 3-step process, by the way. The first step is past think. Think of a story that relates to the decision you have to make. If you don't have a story of your own, think of someone else's story. Okay, once you have that in mind, go to step 2, which basically is present think. Okay, do the circumstances match? Are they similar? And if so, you are on to step 3. Step 3 is called future think. What are the implications of that decision? Is it the right decision? Is it good for everyone involved? And if so, guess what? You have just made a common sense decision. So, go for it.